Turn to your neighbor and tell him, I got this. What have you got? You just repeating what I asked you to say? Come on. I believe with all my heart that Abba has this day set aside specifically for you as individuals. Those of you that celebrate the Shabbat, you know that it's an intimate encounter. And every time Abba brings us to the Shabbat, it's an opportunity for us to see some things in His Word, to hear a divine word for us, and to have that supercharged atmosphere for you as an individual, corporately as a family, and then even larger as a group that meets like we are here this afternoon, so that whatever need you may have, that need can be met. Whatever questions that may arise in your life concerning the events that are going on around you, Abba has a solution. And we know, if we look around us, that it looks as if all the world's going to hell in a handbasket, if you'll pardon that term. And Yeshua even said, don't be deceived. In this world, you will have tribulation. See how quiet it got when I said that? Some of y'all turn to your neighbor and ask him, you've been tribulating? Yeah, seems like we've been tribulating as of late. But he didn't stop there. He said, however, be of good cheer. I have overcome. And because he is an overcomer, I now therefore stand in that same capacity. I am. Did you hear what I just said? I am. You may not be. I'm speaking for this gentleman. I am an overcomer. I wish you were. I really wish you were. I wish you could say it with enough confidence to convince me. I'm just going to give you an opportunity one more time. Say that with me. I am an overcomer. Yeah, you're getting better. I'll give you an opportunity at the end of the service to see if you really mean that. I am more than a conqueror. Amen. I believe that Mark just said it. Mark that word. This is an exciting season. We're looking at one of the things in this Torah portion in Numbers chapter 4, verse 21 through chapter 7, verse 89. The title of the Torah portion is Naso. And I dare say if you've been in the Hebrew Roots Messianic community for any length of time, you've probably seen this. We've looked at it in our close to 30 years. We've looked at it dozens and dozens of times. And I saw some things in this parsha that maybe go back and revisit some of the things that I've taught in this parsha and have to ask Abba to forgive me because I believe that I looked at it wrong. And I appreciate that because I believe that sometimes information is withheld until we get into a different realm of maturation. Sometimes it's necessary for us to have to go through the fire to understand why. And sometimes you may not understand until you come out on the other side. And I believe with all my heart that what Abba's doing is he's revealing to us some things regarding our relationship with him as individuals and corporately as a body of believers that are to function as the bride in the earth. And you need to understand something. We were taught in the structured church world that if we made it in, we'd barely make it in by the skin of our teeth. That the church would literally be beat down, overwhelmed, overcome. But just as we were discussing earlier, you can't find that in the Scripture. In fact, if you look at what it says, and we'll discuss this a little bit, if you look at it, what it says throughout the Torah, in particular in the book of Hebrews, regarding our relationship with him as the bride of Messiah, we're told that he is at the right hand of the Father waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. And that's an indicator, in my opinion. We've talked about this before. If someone is waiting for an event to happen, it indicates that he's there. He's not the one that's actually instrumental in making this event take place. And so you have to ask yourself, who is it that's going to subjugate the enemies of Yahweh? I believe that it is the corporate body of Messiah, known as the bride here on the earth, that's going to do that. But there's some things that we have to understand. And once again, we were taught that once you get saved, everything's going to be all right. And as a matter of fact, we used to sing that song, I've got a feeling everything's going to be all right. I'm going to tell you something. Once you get born again, you just are beginning to find out how difficult it can be to live a life of a believer. And what Abba's wanting us to do is to understand that we can make it. In the world, you're going to have tribulation. But I also understand that we can be overcomers, and we need to know how we can live a life as an overcomer, how we can grow and mature and become the kind of believers that He's called us to be and not shirk our responsibility when it comes time to man up. And so this is what we're going to find in this Torah portion. You're going to have a very powerful prophetic look into the future, and the details in this particular portion are going to give you some insight regarding the Levitical priesthood. And the title of our Torah portion called Naso. And as we look at it, you'll see some of the things that are embedded in this Torah portion, including the priestly benediction. And you're going to find that there's some instructions regarding a specific, enigmatic, puzzling ritual. And it's the ritual that's found in Numbers chapter 5 called the bitter waters of jealousy, the testing for the adulterous bride. The rabbinic circles call it the Sota ritual. It's this particular ritual that caught my attention. And I promise you that you're going to see some things. Listen to me. I want you to do what 2 Timothy 2:15 says first of all. And that verse says, study to show yourself. In other words, your responsibility is to study the Scripture. Now, you can hear these kinds of teachings, and that's great because I believe with everything in me that Father gave me this to bring to you, but He also expects you to be mature enough and responsible enough to become vested in the material and the information so that you can make it your own. And so, study to show yourselves approved unto Yah, workmen that need not to be ashamed, and the only way you can keep from being ashamed is to rightly divide the word of truth. So don't take my word for this. Go back and look at it yourself. I'm going to give you a preponderance of information, and the information is going to be so overwhelming that you're going to, if we were in a court of law, the evidence alone that I'm going to present is, in my opinion, almost irrefutable. On the other hand, it's going to be incumbent upon you to make that decision. And we're going to look at this ritual, because if you go back and look at it, the way it is framed in the King James English, it's chauvinistic, and it's almost from a dictatorial male role who is about to expose very harshly his wife, who's made some mistakes. And again, in the season that we're living in, when we have a very liberal, quote-unquote, woke generation, it's also antiquated from that King James perspective. And it's the law of the adulterous bride, the adulterous wife, the law of the Sota. And I promise you, if you begin to look at it in the Hebrew text, you're going to see some mystery begin to be revealed that has been, I believe, obscured intentionally until the season that we're living in right now. And it's going, in my opinion, as we begin to unveil this and look at it from the perspective of the Hebrew language, you're going to see some things regarding this ritual and the future. Listen to me. There is a future adulterous bride that's going to be exposed in the camp of the genuine bride. Did you hear what I said? Go back and read Revelation chapter 12 through chapter 18 if you don't believe what I'm trying to share you this afternoon. And so it's important for you to go back and examine this and look at this particular ritual. How many of you have ever looked at the Numbers chapter 5, the bitter waters of jealousy? It has to deal with a woman who is suspected of adultery. Her husband brings her before the priesthood, and she's being accused. And we're going to look at it a little bit more in depth, but I want to kind of just break it down for you. And if she's found guilty, according to what we've heard in the past, she drinks a quote-unquote potion, and that potion causes her belly and her thigh to rot out. It looks as if it's a death penalty if she's guilty, and it exonerates her if she's not. If she's not guilty, then she's said to conceive and produce seed. Now, if you go back and look at this ritual in light of what we find in Numbers chapter 5, 12 through 31, it's interesting because it falls right between some instructions for the priesthood and then the final offerings of the tabernacle given by the heads of Israel. And you can't just overlook these kinds of things because Yahweh is the author and the finisher of our faith. And if He puts something in a specific place in the text, and it seems as if it may be kind of pigeonholed here between something that's it's almost incredulous to look at it. Why is this put in this particular place? Then you need to stop and go back and just ask Him, why is this here? And is there something that's hidden that I need to ask myself, why haven't I seen it before? And so we're finding that there's some instructions given to 3 of Levi's sons. In fact, the house of Levi is going to be numbered in this particular Torah portion. And so what I wanted to do, and Tim and I were talking about it early this morning, the importance of the Hebrew names. If we understand from the Western mindset, then we really are pretty much lost on the significance, the prophetic instruction that's embedded in naming our children. The Hebrew culture understood that. When you placed a name on a child, it was literally a prophetic declaration over that child, and that child, listen to me, if you cultivated and nurtured that child accordingly, that child would grow up into that name and literally become what that name embodied. My name is Yochanan David, John David. And if you look at it, both names mean beloved or indicate that. One of them happened to be a warrior. And I sometimes can have a warrior's mentality. And the interesting thing about it is that there are negative connotations as well. And so if we place a name upon someone, and listen to me, if you don't think so, you just start listening, or maybe go back and revisit your own childhood and think about some of the things that were said regarding who you are. And you'll find out that it's exactly the truth. And so what I want to do as we start this study, I want to look at the names of these three sons of Levi. One is Kohath, the other is Gershon, and the other Merari. If you look at the word Kohath, or the name Kohath, is usually translated as assembly, to gather together expectantly. We could actually be called a Kohath here today because we're an expecting assembly. Did you hear that? Isn't it interesting that when a woman she has received seed and that seed's incubating, she's expecting. And so if we are an expecting assembly, it indicates we have received seed and something's being nurtured on the inside of us. If you go back and look at what Abiram has to say regarding the name Kohath, it is also translated as being obedient. In other words, as I'm gathering here expectantly, I am obedient regarding something that Abba has said that's given me some boundaries to function inside. And again, as we continue to stretch out that definition, it hints at hope by obedience, hope that's found when we are obedient within a particular bond or union, like in a marriage relationship. And then you look at the name Gershon. The name Gershon is usually translated as exile, and it comes from the root garash, which means to put one away, to divorce someone. And the first time you see it is in Genesis chapter 3, when Yahweh has to garash, he has to drive out Adam and Eve from the garden. And the final name is the word Merari. And if you look at the root stem of the word Merari, the mem resh, it indicates to be bitter, to be rebellious, to be unhappy, to be filled with misery, and to flow with bitterness. Now think about this. Listen to me very carefully. These individuals knew the Hebrew language. They were Ivrit. They were Hebrew. And here they are. They have named their sons accordingly. Now, you can say, well, there's a positive and a negative connotation. But as we begin to look at it, it's quite evident from the textual context that the negative was what's coming out here in this particular discourse. And so if we take the definition that we've just extrapolated of these three names, here's what you arrive. If I were to give you these three names, Kohath, Gershon, and Merari, then you could literally say this. Because of the lack of obedience in the marriage bond, it produced unhappiness that led to misery, and then misery led to bitterness, and the misery and bitterness finally led to a putting away. And now you think about this, and as I have in my notes here, it may seem as if I'm making a mistake, but if you look at it in the Hebrew language, these names here begin to prophesy regarding Levi's future as part of the bride of Israel, because it's speaking of the sons of Levi, the principal sons here. And this is a prophetic declaration that's been made over these sons. And so we just don't set this aside. We need to go back and examine it and find out what's happening, because these sons are being discussed, and it leaves you there all of a sudden, and then it interjects, if you will, this law of the sotah, the bitter waters of jealousy. And so I had to ask myself, is it possible that these names serve as a segue, a transition into this discussion about this bitter waters of jealousy ritual? Is it possible that Yahweh's inserting right here, as He's given us some peculiar insight about taking a census of the Levitical priesthood who are supposed to serve Him in the tabernacle and set example for the rest of the house of Israel? Now, you need to stop and ask yourself, why is that? What was the role of the priesthood? I'm going to explain to you. It's my understanding that the priesthood actually were charged with functioning much like the role of the bride to her husband. And once again, you can get into this chauvinistic kind of mindset and say, well, the wife serves her husband. You'll see a little bit later that that's actually not the case. The husband is to serve the bride. And when the Western mindset regarding serve almost gives us the idea that one is a slave to the other. But that's not what it teaches in the Hebrew language. It literally indicates that one is giving themselves. It's like the law of sowing and reaping. And I usually, when I'm talking to people and young folks considering marriage, and I'm talking to them about what they would prefer out of a relationship, I always ask them, what are you looking for out of this marriage? And when they begin to name these things, I ask, are you planting that? Because you will not get this if you're not planting it. If you're not planting yourself into this relationship, then you're not going to reap the benefits later on. And so it seems as if that this ritual is inserted here, and it seems as if it's given us some insight regarding how Yahweh is later going to treat the adulterous house of Israel. Because we're going to encounter what's known as the golden calf incident, and we'll find out a little bit of things about that as well. Now, as I began to look at it, it caught my attention, and I could not look away from it. And again, I've looked at this Torah portion dozens and dozens of times. But I want to speak to you, first of all, from the traditional King James viewpoint, probably the viewpoint that you've held, because most of us embrace the King James. We've learned that you have to go back and dig into the bowels, if you will, of the Hebrew language to really understand the King James text. This ritual seems to involve a marriage that's clearly devolved to the point that jealousy, adultery, and judgment have become the byproducts of a broken relationship. Wouldn't you agree to that? Are you afraid to answer? Wouldn't you agree to that? The longer you don't help, the less you help, the longer we're going to be here, okay? Now, if that's the case, let's stop a second and revisit the title of the Torah portion. And the title is Naso. Again, these names, these words are not here by accident. And this word Naso is usually translated as to lift, to bear up, and to take. But it also indicates to sustain, to endure, to take away, and to forgive. Now, in view of our forthcoming conversation regarding the adulterous woman who is being accused by her husband, it seems as if this title, Naso, should have been employed in their relationship. In other words, there should have been a forgiving, enduring attitude, right? Maybe there was, and it just kept going over such a long period of time until the emotions became so frayed that they decided that, here's what we're going to do, and it brought them to the point that they were. But if you look at this title, Naso, and the events that we're about to examine, it seems to indicate that the lifting up of a person who is in the position that this adulterous woman was, that what we were supposed to do, rather than offer that condemnation and judgment, we should begin to encourage them and learn how to set people free from their personal prisons by pardoning them and by extending forgiveness when we want to rush to judgment. There are times when judgment is necessary. But there are also times when there are mitigating circumstances that you and I may not see. And a lot of times, especially in the believing community, we're quick to rush to judgment. Are you listening to me? Now let me just share something with you. If you go back and reread this, and I suggest you do after today's teaching, this woman's accused of adultery, but there's no witness. If there's no witness, you can't bring charges against her in the court of law. If there had been witnesses against her, then rather than going to the priest, you take her to the court of law along with the individual that she's been guilty with, and both are going to be capitally punished. But when you have no witnesses, all you have is what we see in the King James English. I've just got a jealous spirit. I believe she's doing something. Then you bring her to the priest, and listen to me, she does not have to take this bitter waters of jealousy. It's a voluntary thing. The interesting thing about it is that the husband also doesn't have to bring himself and suffer the embarrassment of bringing his wife before the pastor, the priest. He could literally, because of what he's feeling in his heart, he could literally have divorced her and put her away and not even give her back the bride price. So there's a lot more going on here than what we initially thought. Now, before we go any further, let me share something else that I believe would probably be considered antiquated by a lot of the liberal believing community, and that's the truth. There are a lot of liberal, quote-unquote, believers, and that's out of their own mouths, not mine. That's going to be up to Yahweh to judge. A sanctified marriage was intended to serve as an eternal example of our corporate, all of us, and our personal relationship, mine and my wife, with Yahweh as His bride. My relationship with my wife is going to be a mirror of my personal relationship with Him. Okay? Now, if that's the case, and we form the bride, He is my husband, He is my redeemer. Am I right? Well, then that means that the husband's responsibility is to function as the bride's redeemer. And once joined together, the husband's life wholly is given in exchange for hers. His role is to provide, secure, and adorn her, and therefore my relationship with my spouse will reflect my romance with my king. That being said, in the King James English here, what the true intent of this bitter waters of jealousy ordeal is hidden. It looks as if the husband knows she's guilty. From the King James English, it looks as if the husband knows she's guilty. He cannot prove it, and he has this jealous rage that needs to be dealt with. And so he's set on exposing her and or divorcing her, and it seems as if he's relishing in her judgment. On the other hand, from a different perspective, it looks as if this poor wife has got a freaking jealous husband and she can't do anything to please this fool. And he is just accusing her and has probably been for such a long time, probably guilty of himself and hasn't been caught. And so he has this jealous rage come over him, and he's bringing this poor hapless individual before the priest because he got no witness against her, only that old jealous rage. And so he's coming before the priest, and boy, he's about to get his comeuppance, because when she drinks this potion and her belly and her thigh doesn't rot out, he's going to be exposed now. So you got two different viewpoints, right? But what about 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 8? That says that love covers a multitude of sin. 1 Peter 4, verse 8 is actually Genesis chapter 3 in action. Adam and Eve functioned as the bride of Yahweh and were guilty of idolatry and adultery, just like in this case, and worthy of destruction. But what happened? What happened? You see, the Messiah steps in, just like he was alluding to Brother Tim earlier, and he stood between them with his arms extended, and he took their judgment. In other words, he covered their sin. That's what 1 Peter 4 is talking about. It's talking about, yes, someone may have incurred judgment, and yes, they may deserve judgment, but what we do is that we stand in front of them and we take that penalty until such time as they can recover themselves, as long as they've been demonstrating righteousness, forgiveness, and repentance. You understand what I'm saying? Now, I'm not talking about abject rebellion, but we stand in front of them rather than expose it, and that's what a lot of our quote-unquote gossip does inside the house. Are you listening to me? Let's look a little further. I want to begin to look at the accusations against this alleged adulterous bride. It seems again from the King James Version of the text that the suspected wife is treated kind of harshly, and her jealous husband is going to force her to be exposed. Now, once again, in my notes here, the sages agree that there are no witnesses to any accusation against her, because if there was a witness, not only would the witness would say, yeah, she was with so-and-so. And so both would have to be stoned publicly. Are you listening to what I'm sharing with you? So the King James Version would have us believe that the ordeal is meant as much to deal with the jealous spirit of the man as it is the quote-unquote accusations against her. So it seems to me that there's literally a breakdown in communication in the house, the marriage, that's led each, the wife and the husband, to do things that could lead to broken trust. Now, once more, I want to remind you, this ritual is voluntary and there's no proof of guilt. Had there been proof of guilt, she would never have been taken before the priest. She would have been taken to the law, and the law would have dealt with her publicly. And so, from our traditional perspective, it seems that this entire ritual is designed to extract guilt and set judgment. I want to remind you that every time you see an illustration like we are here, go back and look in Leviticus, it doesn't matter. Anytime you see Yahweh talking about something incurring judgments, whether it's leprosy in a house, sin in the camp, it is put there as a teaching mechanism to show us how we are supposed to live as individuals in a corporate community, and how the word of Yahweh should always be there as our standard, and it sets up metes and bounds. It sets up boundaries to keep us from compromising, okay? And so I want to remind you of what John 3:16 says. Yahweh loved us so much that he sent his son to die for us. Everybody's familiar with John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Everybody's familiar with it. Well, what about John 3:17? John 3:17, even though the world, and if you go back and look from Genesis chapter 3 forward, like it or not, all of us are guilty of idolatry, and idolatry is spiritual adultery. And so every one of us are guilty of this adulterous accusation that we see here in Numbers chapter 5, and worthy of death, because unlike this adulterous woman who's been accused here, we have witnesses against us. Are you listening? And so technically we have incurred a death penalty and should be suffering capital punishment publicly according to the law, to the Torah. But John 3:17 says, for Yahweh didn't send his son into the world to condemn the world. Wait a second. It looks as if the way that the law is used, right, that the law was set there for condemnation and judgment. But it doesn't say that. It says that he didn't send the son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And so the law functions as a set of boundaries and guidelines. In other words, if I come to this traffic light right here outside the building, and the traffic is just flowing freely without anything hindering it, and I'm being told by the traffic signal that I need to stop, and I decide I'm going to blow through the traffic, and I get T-boned, I just broke the law, and I'm suffering the penalty of the law. That law was set there for my benefit and the benefit of the others. And if I go crying and whining and moaning when the state or trooper or the sheriff department comes up, it's not the law's fault. Are you hearing me? So what I'm trying to share with you is, in setting this whole thing up, we need to be careful in judging. Are you listening to me? People that live in glass houses should not throw stones. We need to be careful in judging, but on the other hand, we need to know how to rightfully balance this thing, because we should never shirk the responsibility that's ours to judge. So let's look once more at this Hebrew title, Naso, because it seems to hint that this sotah ritual was not meant so much to punish the wife as it was to prove her innocence and to encourage her by forgiveness. And once she takes that, it seems as if the whole process then would destroy the jealousy of the husband, making the bitter waters actually an effort to save the marriage. So my goodness, what is actually going on here? There's some really conflicting opinions about what is actually happening in this ritual. Most of it, I would dare say the vast majority of it's based on poor translation, and the other is simply because we haven't studied it. And so we're going to look deeply into the Hebrew text, and I've been accused even recently of just presenting a theory. Well, you know, that's what all facts are. To the unlearned and ignorant, they're theories until it's proven to them. Say amen right there. And I'm going to present this, and you can call it a theory if you want, but the evidence, I believe, will support my position more so than your traditional King James opinion in this particular episode called the Sotah Ritual. Now, before going any further, one thing that I want to hit real quickly, and all you have to do, you can Google what I'm talking about, and you'll find that what I'm about to tell you is the truth. There are a lot of individuals out there that say that the bitter waters of jealousy are actually an effort by Yahweh to offer up an opportunity to abort an unwanted baby. And that is unequivocally not true. That is a lie from the bowels of hell. Yahweh never sanctioned abortion. Amen? And so I wanted to get that out of the way. And I'll explain to you why a lot of people feel that. And I also want to remind you that most of us have the mindset, and I'm one of them. I'll be quick to admit it. I'm one of those. I'm learning. I'm a lot better than I was 30 years ago. Say amen right there. My wife is over there saying, yeah, he definitely is. I don't like being one of those quick to rush to judgment. And so I'm going to show you an instance of a woman who was guilty. If you go back and look at it, it's guilty of adultery. And you can find it in Matthew chapter 1 in the discussion of the birth of our Messiah. Because Mary is betrothed to Joseph, and the law of betrothal made it just as binding on her as if they had been married for 10 years. And she is found with child. And when Joseph realizes it, and you're going to see some extreme parallels of what I'm sharing you here, Joseph decides, you know, she's with child, it's not my child. The same thing in this one. And what does Joseph do? And Joseph could have had her stoned. Joseph could have broken the engagement. He could have divorced her, so to speak. It actually says in the text that he's minded to put her away privately. In other words, he decides he may need to just set her aside and let's just forget about this thing, but I don't want to embarrass her in the public. And that would have happened if it had not been for an angel of Elohim appearing to Joseph and setting Joseph straight. Now, if Joseph had decided at that time, this woman is pregnant with someone else's baby, I don't know whose it is. She says it's the Holy Spirit. I don't have a witness, and so I can't take her before the law, but I'm going to take her before the priest. And if he could have taken her before the priest, she could have refused, just like in this case. But if she had drank the bitter waters of jealousy and been found guilty, Mary could have died and be cursed in the meanwhile. Do y'all see that? That's why we need to be careful when we just arbitrarily read something and say, well, Numbers chapter 5, this is an adulterous woman. She needs to be stoned. Are you hearing me? Is it a little bit different? Now, as we go back and begin to examine this, you're going to see some things that kind of, to me, it was a head scratcher. I'll be honest with you. My wife will tell you, I just said there was a couple times I'd get up and I'd go upstairs. I've just, this is taking a different turn. And I'd come back. Numbers chapter 5 says, and she has been found that a man has lain with her carnally. In the Hebrew it says, V'shakav ish ata shikavat zera. This verse is almost always translated as just one simply involved in an adulterous act. But it's not the case here, because in the King James English, she's just being accused of having sex with another man. Can't prove who it was, but it looks as if she's had sex with another man. That's what it says in the King James English, right? But in the Hebrew, it gets extremely specific. And if you go back in the Hebrew, and I had someone just recently tell me you don't need the Hebrew language, and I'm telling you, hogwash. Because even the New Testament, I can prove the New Testament, and not just me, there's people with a lot more education than I am that can prove it as well. Even the New Testament was written in Hebrew, and you cannot understand the Scriptures. You can get a basic understanding of it, just like when we first moved here from Mississippi. Most of the folks in Oregon, Tim and Jean would probably say amen. They could understand some of what I said, but there's a few things they thought was peculiar. Well, that's the same way here. You just can't get it if you don't go back and look in the Hebrew language. Well, that word lie, to lay down with another man, is the word shakav. And it means to lay down with someone in sexual relations. I got that. But when it says carnally, the text in the Hebrew puts it in an entirely different perspective. That word is shikavat. And even though it has the same root as the word lie, shakav, here it indicates an effusion or emission with an hyphenated zera attached to it in the Hebrew, which means seed, that you don't see translated in the King James English. And so it literally says in the Hebrew that she has had sex with seed. And I thought, wait a second. Doesn't all adulterous situations result in that? By and large, they do. But the writer specifically mentions in the Hebrew, not in the King James English. I'm telling you, the King James, and y'all can get mad with me if you want. That doesn't intimidate me in one bit. But the King James English intentionally translates things certain ways to keep you, and I believe that they had help from some of the Jewish scholars to keep you from understanding some of the things that are hidden here. The text makes it plain that her lover was not known, else both would have committed a capital crime. So why and how would he use the term sex with seed? Shikavat zera. It seems to me that the writer here is pointing to something that has been, prior to our looking at it, hidden. Would you think so? And there are some other prohibitions throughout the Torah of adultery. But this term, translated in the King James, sex with seed, shikavat zera, is only found here in Leviticus 18:20. And in both instances, the individuals, the two participants, are considered tameh or defiled. And so it seems to me, as we're looking at this in the Hebrew language, that there's more than just calling this, and I hate to relegate it to this term, more than just a simple case of adultery. Are you listening to me? Now, there's another peculiar Hebrew word that's been overlooked, and you see it in Numbers chapter 5, verse 20 and verse 29. And it talks about how this woman has gone aside to another instead of her husband. Isn't that a given? She's lying carnally with a man, right? And you have to stop and go back and read these things in the Hebrew. When it says instead of her husband, it's the Hebrew word takat, And it's translated here as being under or beneath, and it's insinuating that she went outside the covering authority of her husband as the priest of her household, and had a relationship with another man. But in 26 other places, that's the only place right here that in this text in Numbers chapter 5, that's the only place that it's translated what you see in the King James English. 26 other places is translated in place of. She had a relationship with another man in place of. Now, once again, our Western mindset misses this. But you need to go back and understand it's the husband's place, indicating my spot and my time to have a relationship with my wife. And so when the time comes and the place is reserved for me to have a relationship of intimacy with my wife, for some reason, and I believe that the man was conspicuously either he was incapacitated or he had to be absent for some reason, and when the time came, someone stepped into his place. Well, that just doesn't make sense. You remember the first commandment? How many of you can tell me what the first commandment is? Come on, help me out. Say it again loud, Brittany. Thou shalt have no other gods in my face. If you go back and break it down, in my place. Are you hearing me? Now bear that in mind. It indicates that there is a set time for relationship with his wife, and he was not able to be there. Come on now, help me out. And so I want to look at something else. Again, these are phrases and words connected to them that you need to go back and look at. For instance, verse 21. Once she drinks this potion, and I'm using that term lightly, this concoction, whatever you want to call it, it is said that it will make her thigh to rot and her belly to swell. Every time I've looked at it before, I thought, this is a death penalty. If she drinks this potion and she's guilty, we're going to sit there and watch. Ooh, look at that. She's bloated. That belly's swelling and the thighs rotting out. This woman's guilty. That's how you know. That's how she knows she's guilty. Her belly and her thighs, her belly swelling, her thighs rotting out. Come on, isn't that what you thought before? You know, tell the truth. That's exactly what you thought. Well, the word for thigh here is indeed the word yederek, and it means loins and buttocks. But this word for rot, that is said that her thigh would rot out, doesn't mean rot. It's translated rot. In our Western mindset, when you say rot, it means something's just going to start dying and deteriorating and being consumed and falling off or whatever and dying. Isn't that right? Well, in the Hebrew, it's the word nephal. And this word nephal means to fall, to lie, to drop. But the idea here in this context indicates that her thighs beginning to sag, her loin areas are beginning to sag and lose its firmness. And it's interesting as you look at it because that word nephal has a numeric value of 160, the same as the Hebrew word etz for tree. And so once more, it connects us to another ritual where the children of Israel were a place that needed water and the waters were bitter and they couldn't drink. And so Moshe, at the unction of the Holy Spirit, throws a tree into the water and the waters are sweetened and it becomes potable. And so it's interesting. It seems as if the waters of her womb are bitter at this time, and there could be no tree found to cast into the waters of her womb to cleanse it. And now look at the word for belly. It's the word beten, and it is belly and womb. And then the word swell, zabeh, which is means to incline, to swell, to become very prominent. Now, let me just remind you, there's nothing in the text, either the King James English or the Hebrew, that says that this woman is going to die from drinking this concoction. It's only our Western understanding of the King James use of the word rot that we got that from. In fact, there's actually no time frame, no chronological order regarding when and where this woman's belly and thigh began to swell and sag. Are you hearing me? Now, as we continue to look at it, even today, if I was speaking to someone else and my wife is pregnant and I make the statement about my wife, my wife's belly is swelling and she'd probably get in trouble. I'd probably get in trouble if I said her loins are sagging, her thighs are sagging. But you understand, if I was to begin to make those kind of descriptions, what would you say? Well, that woman's showing, right? She's showing the signs of being pregnant. Are you hearing me? Okay? Now, it seems to me that the reason that she's being brought before this priest is because she is displaying signs of showing to this husband, and he sees those signs of showing, and now you can understand why he's being accused of being jealous. Are you hearing me? And I'm asking again, is it possible that he could have been absent or incapacitated for what could have been the proper timing, the place? If she is in fact expecting at this particular time, and you might say, well, how's he going to know when she was her most virile or ovulating or ready? How would he have known? Well, in today's society, it's a little bit more difficult than it was at that particular time, but there is proof prior to the advent of artificial light that women in a general location would all go through menstrual cycles at the same time. This was such a prominent and prevalent issue, no pun intended, that a lot of societies, ancient and even today, would set aside specific tents, houses called the Red Lodge or Moon Lodges, so that when the women of the house or the women of a general location were on their cycle, they would move into the house for 7 days. And I got to thinking, wait just a second. If all of the women in a general location are going through the cycle together, as a man, all the rest of the men, hey, bud, what's happening over there? Your house is empty too. Yeah, my house is empty. Where's your wife? Well, she's over in the tent with the rest of them. You hear that noise? They're having a party over there. You fending for yourself? Who's cooking for the kids? Is it takeout tonight? And so I would have known, the whole camp of men would have marked a calendar, and I'd have known exactly when she was coming back to the house. I would know when the 7 days are over. So this man had a kind of an idea of when the place would be ready. Are you listening to me? Have you ever thought about this like that before? It seems to me that there's a little bit of doubt in this man's mind that he might be the father. And so I'm asking you again, because all he had to do was put her away. He could have divorced her, but no, what's he doing? I believe that what he's actually doing is bringing her to take this Sotah ritual in order for a paternity test to be taken. And once again, I think that she understands as well. She wants to be exonerated. That's why this thing is voluntary. She doesn't have to take it. And you have to ask, if she does take it, what does she have to gain or to lose? If she's guilty, she's a fool. Hello? You ain't got no witness. What's up? You ain't got no witness. I ain't drinking nothing. Do you see what I'm saying? This is in the language. It looks to me guilty or innocent that the husband is actually doing what he can to salvage the marriage. He actually could have put her away, and nothing would have been said. Go back and look at it. I have a couple of sites here for you so that you can go back and look at regarding the timing. How many of you remember Rachel in her tent when she had Laban's house god? You ever wonder why Sarah had a tent of her own? Rachel had a tent of her own. It's because of what I'm sharing with you right now. So this is not an accident, okay? Now, did you know that I know I'm speaking to the choir here, have a lot of ladies that probably understand what I'm talking about, that it's possible to be pregnant after only 1 or 2 weeks of missing a cycle? And it's also possible, listen to me, it is possible to begin to develop signs as early as 6 weeks. In other words, 42 days. Think about that. Because that 42 days is very important. I got to thinking about that. 42 days is pretty significant. How many of you remember the 42 months of great tribulation and 42 months of tribulation? At the end of 42 months of tribulation, I believe Yahweh's going to realize his bride has begun to show signs of being pregnant. And so what's Allah going to do? He's going to initiate megathalipsis, great tribulation, and the 43rd month is going to set in motion some utter chaos, and it's going to expose the harlot bride in the earth. Say amen. Wow. Let's look at a place where you see this 42. And you probably have not thought about it this way, but I'm telling you, this stuff is here. And in fact, this whole Sotah ritual you can see all the way back in Genesis chapter 3 to Revelation chapter 18. Let's look at the golden calf and its ritual. Are y'all getting anything out of this? I'm not even halfway. Are you going to be able to stand it? I got 40 minutes left. Exodus 32, verse 4 through 35. The children of Israel are at Mount Sinai, and a betrothal is going on. A betrothal is as binding lawfully as a literal marriage. Moshe is delaying to come down from the mountain. You remember the story. While he's on top of the mountain, Aaron attempts to appease the wayward bride of Israel, and what does he do? He makes a golden calf. Edgel Masakah, which means a molten calf, and the result of that incident is an adulterous act. In response, Moshe, Joshua hear the calamity. They come down from the mountain. Moshe breaks in anger the tablets of testimony, and the tablets of testimony are the blessings and curses. Remember with the Sotah, the bitter woman of jealousy? If you go back and look at what happens there in Numbers chapter 5, the accusations against her are written on parchment. And they take the dust off the tabernacle floor. They put the dust on the parchment. They take living water that has been consecrated, and they pour that living water across those accusations that have been written against her, and it pours into a cup. It washes the ink and the dust into this cup. The rabbis say that the name Yod-He Vav-He would have been written on that parchment as well, and it blots out the name and washes it into the cup. What it's done is it's actually blotted out the accusations against her, and then she's drinking that. Are you listening? Now think about that. The blessings or curses are represented in these two tablets. And it's not an accident. If you look at the numeric value of Egel Mesakah, the value is 228, the same as the phrase Etz Chaim, the tree of life. And so what happens here, Aaron sees the camp in rebellion. So you have bitter waters going on in the camp. You can't drink the bitter waters. He knows that the camp can't drink the bitter waters. And so rather than taking the tree of life, the living testimony or tablets of stone, and throwing them into this bitter water, what does Aaron do? Aaron reaches and takes the gold earrings and throws them into the fire. He throws in a pagan idol representing the God of Israel, and out comes an Egel Mesakah, a golden calf. You see that? The word for tablets is the word luach, and it means a polished plate of stone. And I'm going to kind of go through this as quick as I can. Luach has a value of 44, the same as the word dam, meaning blood. Is it possible that these tablets could have represented the DNA of the original blood or light of Elohim? And as such, is it possible that these words, this ketubah, because that's exactly what it was a marriage proposal and a contract, could it literally have represented the seed of Elohim allowing Israel an opportunity to produce sons? This was the place. Just like the man had timing, he had a place. Yahweh had a specific timing and a specific place. Did you know the Shabbat is one of those times? The Shabbat is one of those places. And if you are absent from the place, and someone else, some other entity, some other quote-unquote fallen deity steps into that place, it's the same thing that we see happening here. Say amen. The word testimony. edut. It means testimony or witness, a law. It has the same root, ayin, vav, dalet, ud, as the word for the coals of fire that were united together back when the fiery mist watered the garden. And it has a numeric value of 480, the same as moladek, which means generations and offspring. And I had to ask myself, and I want you to think about this, because this tablet literally displayed the words of Elohim. Am I right? And how was it shown us in Genesis chapter 2 that Adam was to procreate, and Yahweh himself would procreate by saying, let it be. And so the word that is released is what caused, the word became seed, and that's what produced sons. Am I right? So is it possible that these two tablets of stone that Moshe is carrying literally was a prophetic family tree that reached not only to those that were around the mountain at that particular time, but it spoke of all of the generations that were in the loins of Israel that were to come in a future day? Do you think maybe, listen to me, I want you to be careful here. Do you think maybe that your name could have been written on those tablets of stone? Now, I want you to think about this. Is it possible that those sons were spoken into creation from Adam forward, even though we didn't see them yet? We were not seeing that, but our name, we were known before our mothers birthed us, and so it was known before the foundation of the world that you would be born? And is it possible that in the day that you're living right now, you have the opportunity to be a son or daughter of Elohim, and so you decide, no, I refuse that name? Well, this is exactly what's going on here at Mount Sinai. Are you hearing me? Could Moshe have been carrying the living bread, the seed of his presence, in preparation for a banquet? And should Israel consume it, that same bread would become a witness or a testimony, whereupon they would be impregnated with the fire of Elohim and produce future generations of sons? And if that's the case, then the tablets represent both blessings and curses, depending on one's obedience or not, his guilt or his innocence. Now, consider this. The tablets were a wedding ketubah and contained accusations against Israel. The wedding ketubah told Israel everything that Yahweh would do for them. And so it becomes a blessing until you decide, no, I don't want anything to do with the terms of that wedding contract, and you break it. Now it becomes a curse. Are you listening? And as a result, accessing the DNA that was inside those words were lost. Did you just hear what I said? You remember what the rabbis say about the name Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh written on the accusations against the woman, and when the water is poured across it, it blots out the name. It literally means his name ceases to exist. You realize what that's saying? All the way back to Genesis chapter 3, and again here at Mount Sinai. Yahweh's name has been written on the accusations against Adam and Eve. Now fast forward to Mount Sinai. Yahweh's name's written above the accusations of Israel. And when they drink the bitter waters, the name's blotted out. If the name's blotted out, that means he will never have seed. And Yahweh says it's for my great name's sake. And so his name can never be blotted out. And so, considering that, all the way back to Revelation 13:8, when it says the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, Yahweh set in motion a remedy to keep his name from ever being blotted out, and he sent the Messiah not only become the Lamb, but the Messiah would drink the cup of bitter waters for us so that Yahweh's name would never be blotted out and seed could come. Can you see that? My goodness, this is just powerful. It's interesting because if you look at the words that's used here, it says that Aaron caused the people to become naked. That's the word parah. And that word literally means to take a woman's hair. In that particular time, a woman traveled in public with her hair up. she would only let her hair down in privacy, and if she was going to be made a shame or a laughing stock or pronounced as cursed in the community, they would take her hair and it would be put down and she'd be disheveled and then be made a curse. The priest does that to the woman in Numbers chapter 5. She's forced to let her hair down. Well, this is exactly what Moshe says that Aaron does. He causes the people to be uncovered and their hairs let down, and the nations look at Israel and see that they have been naked. They're in a compromised, idolatrous, adulterous position. Do you see that? Now, it's also interesting because if you look at that word para, peresh, ayin, and just rearrange it, ayin, pei, resh, you get the word afar, which is the word for dust. And that's the word for the dust that would be there in the tabernacle that the woman would be forced to drink with the water, and there at Mount Sinai. And it's interesting, it says that Aaron took the calf which they had made, and he burned it in the fire, and ground it into powder, and strawed it upon the water. And listen to this. And it says that Moshe made the children of Israel to drink it. Am I right? Well, how could he make them drink it? It's voluntary. It's voluntary. Can't be forced to do it. And so now I had to go back. I said, this is shot myself in the foot. Can't teach this. Because right here, he's making them drink it. I said, I got to go back. And I got to find a back door in here because these folks are never going to accept this because they're going to dig into it and they're going to look at my notes and they're going to see I made a mistake. So I went and looked at this word made. It's the word shachah. And it doesn't mean made, as in forced to drink. What it actually means, it's the same phrase used in Genesis chapter 2, verse 6, when it says water went up, a mist watered the ground. There had been no rain. And so literally what's being said here, instead of Moshe making them drink it, Moshe took the golden calf, the dust of the golden calf, and took living water and commingled the two and watered that and poured it into a chalice, and the people, listen to me, it's voluntarily. The people voluntarily, willingly drink it because it's a voluntary test. Well, you say, why would they do that? You realize what they're doing? They're willingly rejecting the name of the Most High. And what they've done, they are flaunting their rebellion by rejecting the marriage proposal that Yahweh has just given them before the Almighty and Moshe. Something's going to happen here. Something's fixing to happen. Now, I want you to understand, this has to be made pretty clear. There are only two results possible after drinking this potion. You're either guilty or you're innocent of adultery. And you got to remember that Israel had recently exited Egypt after 430 years of bondage to and adultery with Pharaoh. Go back and look at the Pharaoh, Peresh, ayin, hey, same root letters as to undo, to loosen the hair, and the word for ephir, dust. Only it has the Hebrew letter hey appended on the end of it, which indicates to become pregnant. Isn't that quite odd? And so as we continue to look at Exodus 32:17 through 28, Moshe hears the clamor. Joshua says, hey, there's a noise going on in the camp. Moshe hears it. They come down, and there's evidently a sexual perversion, an orgy going on in the camp of Israel. And if you go back and look, they've prostrated themselves before the golden calf. And I believe it was more than just a golden calf. There were other calves etched into the stone representing the principal gods of Egypt, known as Apis and Hathor. And they represented the Nephilim, the fallen ones. Isn't that interesting? Because that word Nephal is the same root as the word rot that we looked at in Numbers chapter 5. Are you beginning to see all of these little threads connected? How many of you are getting this? Turn to your neighbor. Turn to your neighbor and tell him you need some help. And so it clearly indicates that those or that which has fallen or sagged is the same as in the case of the woman's thigh back in Numbers chapter 5. Now, it's also interesting because in this particular instance, this perversion that we've been that we're witnessing here at Mount Sinai has been going on for 43 days. You hear what I just said? Remember I told you the woman could show after 42? It's been going on 43 days. Another connection. You see that? 43 days. Brittany mentioned it to me the other day. Times 10, 430 years. Isn't that something? And so it's evident that Israel's perversion is kind of evident. And you can see it from Numbers chapter 5, where the priest makes her loosen her hair publicly. And likewise here at Sinai, the bitter waters of jealousy is clearly applied. And true to the pattern of the test, the results determine either guilt or innocence. Am I right? How many were killed here? Now let me just stop and remind you. On the large end of estimates, they say that it could have been up to 6 million people at Mount Sinai. Some say 600,000 men alone. Okay? And only after drinking this bitter waters, 3,000 are killed. Right? And so you're probably thinking the 3,000, they were the ones that was always got to be at the front of the row and always up there where they can sit next to the pastor. And that plague, that blight come out, and them Levites come out there, and they got them brown nosers. And the rest of us have been sitting way back here in the back. We got spared. That is not what happened. You were guilty or you're innocent. And I'm telling you something. If Yahweh judges equitably, and I assure you He always does, then 3,000 were guilty, and the rest of the camp were exonerated from drinking that. Does that make sense? I'll prove to you. And I'm going to show you where I got the 43 days that they've been going through this situation. Exodus 19, verse 15 says, And Moshe said unto the people, Be ready against the third day, come not at your wives. That starts your third day, okay? Yahweh descends on Mount Sinai on the third day. He calls Moshe to the summit. Moshe ascends and descends numerous times. Remember, he says, on the third day, Yahweh's going to come down on the mountain. Don't come near your wives. But he didn't say, I'm going to give you a couple days, and then that fast time is over with, and you can come back. It doesn't say. Are you listening to me? There's no mention of the length of time that the men were to abstain from intimacy with their wives. And so 43 days later, here at the golden calf incident, you see the law of the sotah being administered. And so it seems as if same things happen in Numbers chapter 5. Here you have 3,000 killed because they're guilty. These men that have abstained and been obedient to the word of Yahweh, they're looking, my goodness, looks like my wife is showing, and I know I didn't come near to her because Yahweh told us don't come near to her, to our wives, until He gave us some instructions. And so something must have happened. I don't know if I just don't understand that. Are you beginning to get the drift here? Nonetheless, as a result of something that happens, the Levites are sent out into the camp and they execute 3,000 of Israel. Again, up to 6 million could have been in the camp. And I submit to you that these 3,000 had to have been guilty of idolatry and adultery during this 43-day period while the other husbands abstained in obedience to the command of Moshe. And now there is evidence of someone showing, in other words, a swollen belly and a sagging thigh that's exposing the condition of those that are going to get slain. Are you listening? Now, I just don't know. I don't know if I can believe this. Let me read Exodus chapter 20, verse 19 and 20. And they said unto Moshe, You speak with us. Brittany touched on this last week or a week before. When did you teach last? Last week? Man, time flies when you're having fun. Speak with us and we will hear, but don't let Elohim speak with us because we'll die. And Moshe, why do you think they'd make that kind of a statement? And Moshe said unto the people, Fear not, for Elohim is come to prove you that his fear may be before your faces, that you don't sin. Wait a second. You think maybe something's going on here? Moshe saying that Yahweh is about to test you so that he can prove you have fear before him and that you're not sinning. Now, I'm going to share something with you. Anytime Yahweh puts someone to the test and says, I'm going to prove you, he always tells you why. Well, here he does. I'm going to give you a test to see if you'll be reverent before me and that there be no sin. Reverent obedience, are you getting that? That word for prove there is Naso, and it means to test or to prove, to put someone through a trial, but it also indicates a smell. It's the same word used back at the bitter waters of jealousy there at Marah, when they were also said to be proven or tested. Now, a lot of the rabbis believe that the sense of smell identifies righteousness, and that's the reason that you see a lot of the perfumes and the incense being prevalent throughout the tabernacle and temple. And again, each time you find Elohim testing someone, he always gives us a reason why. And here it's so that Israel would fear him in order to not sin. And that word fear, yerah, reverence, fear, respect, to regard as holy. Now, when you read that, you don't make a connection with what happens in verse 23. And he says, I want you to fear me. I'm going to put you to a test to make sure that you don't fear me. And then he goes on to say what is about to happen. And he says, you shall not make with me gods of silver. Again, the King James translation, and it's trash. Neither shall you make unto you gods of gold. Well, that's exactly what's about to happen with these golden calf. Am I right? And if you read that, the idea is that you should not make any gods in my place, which is the same accusation as in Numbers chapter 5. And he says, I'm going to put you to a test. Once again, the Sinai encounter seems pretty harsh. You have to ask yourself, 3,000 are killed, 599,900, whatever the numbers, weren't. Were those 3,000 more sinful than others? Well, it looks to me like the case against them is pretty clear. And so what we have to do is to go back and dig a little bit further, and you can see in Exodus chapter 15 that Israel had, in Exodus chapter 15, is when they had just 3 days before come out of Egypt, and they have no water. Remember that? And so you find Israel has been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb through the Passover celebration. But there is a generational curse. Listen to me carefully. You can get saved by the blood of the Lamb, but if you're going to walk this thing out, there are generational soul ties that will encumber you and weigh you down and inhibit you and keep you from living a victorious life. You need to begin to ask Yahweh, how and where and when did these generational soul ties occur? How can I break them off? And what I mean by that, if you have a proclivity towards infidelity, if you struggle with those things, if you have struggles with alcohol and drugs or violent fits of anger and all kinds of other issues, then you need to go back and see, did your parents exhibit that? Did your grandparents exhibit that? And you can go back. If they did, you see where the door was open, and you go back to Egypt, just like he's telling the children of Israel, and you break that power off. The children of Israel had other husbands in Elohim's place while they were in Egypt, and the evidence points to the fact that they were showing their idolatrous infidelity all the way up to this place called the bitter waters of Marah. And you find that a test is given them there. They're given the Numbers chapter 5 bitter waters of jealousy test right there at Marah. And Marah is in the wilderness of Shur. The word Shur is translated as wall here, but it actually indicates it gives a picture of one who turns him or herself about as a harlot would travel. Turn this way, turn that way. Ooh, that's what it's saying. And if you look at the root word shore, it's from the same Hebrew word as bull, which were the principal gods of Egypt, Apis and Hathor. And so there was an intentional stopping place. The children of Israel were thirsty. They needed living water. But they were in a position where they couldn't drink those bitter waters because they were guilty. And if they had drank the bitter waters, the entire camp would have died. And so what Moshe does at the infinite mercy of Yahweh, he hears Yahweh tell him, take this tree, which is a representation of our Messiah being hung on a tree, and he takes that tree and he casts that tree into the bitter waters, and that is what suffices to set aside the death penalty for the entire camp. And it was the purpose of that was to begin to break the soul ties of idolatry off the house of Israel, because those soul ties of idolatry were going to later manifest themselves in physical adultery. And I know you're thinking, how would Israel have been showing? And while I was contemplating that, Matthew 12:34 came to my mind. What were they doing at Marah after being redeemed, delivered? They were bitter, and they were complaining, and they were murmuring. Out of the abundance of a heart, the mouth will speak. Did you hear me? The heart becomes the womb of the individual. Whatever seed is in your womb is going to swell up on the inside of you. It's going to cause your thigh to begin to sag and distend so that people can listen to the words that come out of your mouth and tell who your baby's daddy is. And so if you're murmuring and you're complaining and you're bitter, it's quite evident that you haven't divested yourself from the gods of Egypt, and you need this bitter waters of adultery test so that I can prove that you are guilty of harlotry. And the children of Israel knew they could not drink it. Are y'all seeing this? And you think Yahweh is not merciful? I'm telling you, Yahweh's mercy endures forever. And what happened is Israel is in the place at the bitter waters of jealousy where they're insured, a place where there is a wall in their lives that keeps them going around like a revolving door, and they can never go any further in their relationship with Yahweh. How many of you here today and listening on the internet have had things happen in your life that are cyclical, and it seems like you can never break free from them? Don't have to raise your hand. You can if you want. But I'm telling you, it's because we need to avail ourselves of the mercy of Yahweh. He's the one that's taking this cup and drinking it for us. Are you hearing me? And so we need to take advantage of that and break off those soul ties. Say amen. Try and speed up if I can. The whole scenario is a prophetic symbol of Messiah. As that tree was cast into the waters, it's a symbol of Galatians chapter 3 where it says, cursed is the one that hangs on a tree. And it also points to a very powerful verse in Colossians chapter 2 verse 14. And this verse has been intentionally mistranslated so that you could not grasp how powerful the redemption plan of Yahweh was. Not only was the lamb slain before the foundation of the world, but the Messiah would also drink the cup of bitter waters. That's why when he's in the garden and he's in agony, he's in so much agony, science says that when a person's under such extreme stress that the corpuscles and the capillaries inside his skin, your blood can erupt, and you literally will bleed out your pores. And that's described in his agony in Gethsemane. And then he cries out to Abba, and he says, "Oh, Abba, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. What cup do you think he's talking about? He's talking about the cup of bitter waters that the harlot would drink. So he drinks that. He becomes the adulterous bride, takes that penalty for us, and drinks that, knowing that he's taken the curse. All of the curse of every man and woman from Genesis 3 forward, he took upon himself so that you wouldn't have to be cursed. And in Colossians 2, verse 14, it says, because of that the handwriting of ordinances was blotted out. Blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, he took it out of the way and nailed it to his cross. See there? See there? The law's been done away with. It was nailed to the cross. You don't have to keep the law. That's a hogwash. The individuals that would say that are as ignorant as they can be. They don't understand. It's talking about the Sotah ritual. And it's talking about the Messiah having the accusations of adultery poured on the parchment, the accusations that should have been ours, a death penalty that should have been ours. It's talking about that being poured across that into a cup, and it blots out the accusation against us. And he took that, and remember that Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh would also be written on the parchment. And right there, as it's nailed to the tree, is the name of Yod-Heh, Vav-Heh on top of the stake as well. Can you see this? See, this is not an accident. This was planned from the very beginning. Say amen. I'm going to try and skip a little bit further if I can. After casting the tree into the bitter waters, there at Marah, the waters were made sweet. Go back and look. It's powerful because the numeric value is the same as the Hebrew word for loins. And so it's consistent with the promise to become fertile and give birth if the woman is accused is not found guilty. Now, after being redeemed from Egypt, Israel is first set free from a generational curse of sexual perversion. They should have taken advantage of that at Marah. But it's interesting, within a short period of time, they find themselves once more back at Sinai, and 3,000 die for demonstrating that same perversion. You hear what I just said? There was an opportunity. Those 3,000 that died at Sinai could have taken advantage of the forgiveness of Yahweh and not died later. Let's backtrack a little bit further. The original Sotah ritual, back in Genesis chapter 3, if you go back and look at it, Adam and Eve, represented the bride of Messiah. And you can argue that they didn't have an adulterous relationship with the Nakash, but nonetheless, that Sotah ritual is there. How can you say that? Well, you remember what is said of the serpent. It is said to the serpent when Yahweh speaks to him, it says, upon your belly shall you go, and what is it? And dust will you consume all the days of your life. Did you see that? The word for belly is the word rashon, and it is belly, but it actually indicates something that bursts forth and rapidly expands. Same thing in Numbers chapter 5. And the woman is guilty also. In fact, Yahweh had intervened before the foundation of the world. If he had not, Adam and Eve would have been struck from the record, and he would have had to create someone else because his name would have been blotted out. But immediately after speaking that curse to the serpent in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, he says something that just staggers me. Remember when the woman drinks of the cup, if her belly and her thigh doesn't rot out, what does he tell her? You're going to produce seed. Right? Well, here in Genesis 3:15, he tells the woman, your seed, there's a promise of seed to come, you're going to have seed, is going to be at enmity with the serpent's seed. Do you see that? Well, it's abundantly clear that this woman had been guilty, but now we're being told that she's going to conceive and bring forth seed as though she wasn't guilty. But she was. So what happened to grant her mercy? Go back and read Revelation 13:8. The Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, even though Messiah had not taken and drinking literally, physically of the cup. It was set in motion. Yahweh set everything in motion like he did from creation, just like the Lamb was slain before the creation of the world. Messiah drank that cup before the foundation of the world, knowing in advance that Adam and Eve were going to commit an adulterous act with the Nakash, and so Yahweh set mercy into motion long before judgment ever got there. My goodness, this is powerful. Let me go back to Sinai. From the book of Numbers, I know whoever's keeping up with the notes is going to have trouble. From the book of Numbers, we know that the Levitical population was 22,000. How did I get here? Where I'm at on this particular slide. Remember, we're talking about the Levites, and the Levites go into the camp. Moshe tells them, look, guys, who's on the Lord's side? And Levi steps up, right? If you go back and do the math, there's 22,000 of the Levites. And it's my opinion that they circled the base of the Mount Sinai just like they circled around the tabernacle. I believe that they were the security force. And when you start thinking about that, wait a second. Who was it that made the golden calf? Help me out here. Who's quick? Who made the golden calf? Aaron. What tribe was Aaron from? Levite? And the Levites were kind of like the security force. So it sounds to me like Levite must have knew what Levi was doing. Even though the head Levi, Aaron, may have made the final decision, it sounds to me like the rest of the Levites must have been aware of what Aaron was doing and didn't stop it. Say amen. That's why we don't like, as congregational leaders, we don't like yes men. Somebody needs to be able to stand up and say, that pastor, that ain't right. I ain't going to say you'll stay long, but you can say that. So let me ask you this. Didn't we decide earlier? We were talking about Kohath, and Kohath is the son of Levi that was responsible for ensuring obedience to the marriage unit. Remember? Well, isn't that odd? Because Aaron was from the tribe of Kohath, from the tribe of Levi. And so Aaron would have been charged with ensuring obedience to the marriage bond. And so it sounds to me like something is happening to foment a rebellion, right? Well, let me ask you this. We've already established who was complicit in building the golden calf. Which tribe responded to Moshe's call to arms? Levi. Now, to me, that's kind of incredulous. I'm thinking Levi is instrumental in causing a problem. Now we're going to let Levi police the camp. Y'all never thought about that, did you? Levi's involved in the rebellion, and now Levi's going to police the camp. Listen to this. And Moshe said unto them, thus saith Yahweh Elohai of Israel. Now pay attention because you've never seen this before. At least not like this. Put every man his sword by his side and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp and slay every man his brother and every man his companion and every man his neighbor. Wow. Now don't forget, I don't know if it's up there. Look at that. We have an encampment upwards of 6 million people. Most people believe that this area where this is taking place at Sinai would be the place that's known currently as Jebel el-Lawz or Jebel al-Makla. The plains of Jebel al-Makla are approximately 28.6 square miles. In contrast, Salem, Oregon is 49 square miles. And I just don't think, now listen to me, this is just me. If I've got a security force that doesn't have quick-moving vehicles, and I tell you to go out and dispense judgment, you're not going to cover in a short period of time that it would take to kill 3,000 people, because while you're killing 3,000 people, where do you think the rest of the camp's going to be? Oh, we're next. Here's my neck. We're getting out of Dodge. And so it's quite evident that this event took place pretty quickly, and you're not going to travel 28.6 square miles in a hurry. Have you ever thought about that? So where did Levi go? Well, let's look. It says, take a sword and deal with your brother. That word brother is ach, and it means brother of the same parents, kinship, relative, and tribe. Wait a second. Stop right here. I want to clarify something. How were the children of Israel camped around the tabernacle? By tribes, right? And so Levi would have encircled the tabernacle sort of as a security force. Am I right? And there's 22,000 Levites. Am I right? Okay. You said it. You agreed. Companion, a friend, one with whom you have intercourse. Now, this word intercourse could be a verbal intercourse, it could be a daily interaction, it could be sexual intercourse. It fits that. Neighbor, near of place, there's that word place, time and personal relationship. Now, if the population of the camp of Levi totaled 22,000, Woodburn, Oregon is 26,000. I don't think you could go from one end of Woodburn, Oregon with 26,000 people and knock 3,000 of them off in a short period of time. I submit to you that their daily companions and intimate friends, neighbors, and brothers would have been in the camp of Levi. They would not have had time to get out of that population of 22,000 to journey over to Judah's house and kill some Jews from Judah or Issachar or Naphtali or Joseph. Am I the only one that's thought about this before? It's my contention that the offenders that were slain were from the house of Levi. And if there were 22,000, 3,000 is 13.6363636364% of the population of Levi. 13 is the numeric value of the Hebrew word for bride. 63636363 and 64 is 3 gives you 316. It's the value of the word aron, which means to be made naked. 3,000 of the 22,000 of the sons of Levi were guilty of idolatry and adultery and suffered the consequences. Oh, I'm here to tell you that a significant portion of the individuals that stand behind these sacred desks calling themselves apostles and prophets and pastors and evangelists and teachers and rabbis, or T-bone, whatever you want to call yourself, are also guilty of idolatry and adultery. And judgment in the form of the bitter waters is coming. Now, if what I'm saying is true, can y'all hold on? I got about 5 or 6 slides. If what I'm saying is true, then we're being presented with quite a conundrum, because you read about the harlot, which is what we're talking about here, the harlot of Babylon, not only drinking from the bitter cup of waters. In fact, it says that she's going to be given a cup. But it also says that she makes the rest of the world drunk with that same cup. So she drinks from it, and then she gives it to the rest of the religious world. Go back and read it, Revelation 16:19. And so it's evident Adam and Eve were supposed to be priests of the earth, the house of Israel, the tribe of Levi, the believing community. All those who espouse the idea of being kings and priests need to be careful, because if we're not, we're going to drink from that same cup in the near future. And is it possible that this third temple, along with the restoration of a counterfeit Levitical system, will also demonstrate the same rebellion that those 3,000 Levites did at Sinai? Could they once again openly engage in spiritual idolatry, leading to public sexual perversion with a group of fallen deities, Nephilim, Nephal, in defiance of Yahweh just at Sinai? And you would say, impossible. It's a fact that they deny our Messiah, Yeshua's role as Mashiach and as high priest. If they did build a third temple today, Messiah, Yeshua, would not be welcomed in it, and neither would you unless you convert. And they openly acknowledge that they're awaiting for another Messiah, not him, because they do not acknowledge him. So who else is going to come if it's not him? And if the one that's coming is not him, I submit to you, he's an imposter. He is one of those fallen deities, and he's going to be openly embraced. And not only that, but they unabashedly admit that they have cloned a red heifer in anticipation of the red heifer sacrifice, Parah Adumah, which has a numeric value the same as Har Sinai, to be pregnant at Sinai. And the ashes of the red heifers commingled with water, just like the Sotah ritual, ashes afar, like dust. And you can see that Yahweh is trying to show us something in these rituals regarding what is coming in the days ahead. It's well known that Israel, along with all the other nations in this world, have engaged in idolatry by injecting their population with corrupt DNA. DNA is seed. Nanobot technology, that is seed. mRNA, that is seed. And who knows what else may have been intentionally injected. To what purpose? And when I was looking at it, I think, well, the enemy's trying to kill us. I said, no. We thought it was the enemy's plan, but I'm telling you what Yahweh has done is He's allowed the vine to be intentionally pruned worldwide, just like He did when He brought the children of Israel out of Egypt 3 days to Marah to prove them, to put them to a test, to see if they'd bring somebody into His holy, intimate place. And the world is being put to a test as we speak like never in created history. What kind of a test is He putting them to? A smell test. Revelation 18:5 says, for her sins have reached, the smell, the stench of the sins of the harlot has reached into the heavens, and Yahweh has remembered her iniquities. Well, if that's the case, 3,000 of Levi was killed, but Levi also was an instrument in the hand of Yahweh. So it tells me that part of the priesthood of Levi were obedient in the face of harsh reality, having to deal with sin in their own house. Did you hear what I said? It wasn't that they were looking at sin over in Judah's camp or Issachar's camp or Naphtali's camp. This was sin in the house of Levi. We're the ones that's entrusted with moving the tabernacle, handling the tabernacle. Don't you imagine that it brought shame? And yet they stood up and they dealt with it. Where will a priestly pure bloodline be found today? Is it in today's Western church? I don't think so. Many of the mainline denominations have indulged in the same idolatrous practices, openly exposing themselves as having shikavat zera, sex with seed with another lover in place of their husband, Messiah Yeshua. There's another interesting ritual where you see the same thing. How many of you remember when the woman's caught in adultery and she's brought to Yeshua? Remember that? And it says that she was caught in the very act. If she's caught in the very act, that means they saw the man that was with her. Both should have been taken before a court of law and capital punishment applied. But they didn't. What they did, let me just explain to you. At that particular time, Israel was underneath the Roman rule. And so all capital punishment was suspended and only Roman law applied. And so that's why Yeshua was crucified. That was Roman capital punishment. But I can also prove that he was stoned as well. That's another thing. But the interesting thing about it is that they were trying to trap Yeshua. And so rather than taking this woman that had been caught in adultery before the law, they do what number 5 says, take her before the priest. Do you realize what they're doing? They are openly acknowledging that they're bringing her in front of the genuine priest of Yahweh, Yeshua himself. They openly acknowledge that. And then what are they doing? By openly acknowledging that, they're fomenting rebellion, and they're actually mocking him and rejecting him at the same time because they know he is a priest, they know he should be rightfully judging, and they're mocking him in the process. He stoops down and writes in the dust of the earth. He's the living waters. Just one chapter earlier he said that. Those who depart from me shall be written in the earth because they have forsaken Yahweh, the fountain of living waters. Now, they openly mock and challenge him as high priest and rebel against his authority, which is my opinion is regarding what happened that day at Mount Sinai. Now, I know that I'm going to be challenged probably for what I'm about to say, but I don't believe it can be argued at all. Roman law, which was birthed out of Egyptian law, which was birthed out of Babylonian law, absolutely and unequivocally controls all churches and synagogues and mosques today. Did you hear what I just said? If you have not acknowledged Yeshua as your Messiah and made every effort to divest yourself of Babylon and come out of her, my people. And so the only recourse, if you can't go to the law, is to bring the accused before the legitimate priest. Where are and who are those priests? I submit that it's the genuine house of Israel who, like the zealous Levites in our study, will still set a standard of obedience and holiness, even in the face of harsh judgment and Roman oppression. Go back and read the Hebrews, the book of the Melchizedek restoration. And I want to make sure you understand that I'm not advocating violence and going into the camp and dispensing violence. But I do know this. We have to separate ourselves, cutting off the offenders in our midst if they will not submit to the living water of Yahweh. Go back and read 1 Corinthians 6, 1 through 3. Many will say, don't judge lest you be judged. But people that are guilty always remind you of that. And they don't understand that it's mistranslated and should read, don't be guilty, don't judge if you're guilty of the same or similar sin. And so my admonition to you, having heard this whole study, is to get idolatry and adultery out of your house now. You've been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Break the soul ties. Break the generational curses. Very appropriate song you shared this afternoon. Break off those chains and be set free. How many of you want to be set free?